The Odyssey is now in theaters. Does it hit fair seas? Let's find out.
You've seen it before, haven't you?
Once more unto the bridge, dear friends.
Again and again until we're both dead.
There's only like 12 stories. They change around little details, but they're all pretty much the same.
Deja vu. Something very familiar about it.
Hello, welcome to You've Seen It Before, movie reviews with connection in mind. The Odyssey is the latest film from director Christopher Nolan, and it follows the story of Homer's epic poem, and this time we have Matt Damon starring as Odysseus, who, after victory in the Trojan War, is trying to make his way back home to Ithaca, where, after his prolonged absence, a host of suitors are at the gates of his palace, trying to win the hand of his queen Penelope and assume the throne. Now, this video review will contain spoilers of the Odyssey, as well as certain other things. I'll be doing my spoiler-free thoughts first and foremost, though, but just so you know, there will be spoilers later on in this review. So, first things first, though, let's get into some spoiler-free talk on the Odyssey. Is this a good theater experience? Is this a good movie in general? Is this a good adaptation of the story? So, I will put it out there. I have not read Homer's Odyssey for a long time now. I read it in high school, but it's been a while since I've read the book. So my most recent exposure to the story of the Odyssey was rewatching Oh Brother Where Art Thou, which is based on the Odyssey, but of course, through the lens of Depression era Alabama or Mississippi or whatever that was. And so watching this, I recognize certain elements, and especially when you get to a certain point in the story, it's like, okay, this is starting to sound a little bit more familiar. But I only knew, the broad strokes of the story going in. So I helped, and more educated people than me can account for all the various departures from the original story that this movie probably takes. So I'm not going to comment too much on that. I will say, from what I remember of the story, this hits all the high points. And it does a pretty good job with that. And I should also point out that everyone does a good job, I think. I think all of the cast pulls in a good performance. Even those who I was somewhat nervous about going in, more specifically Tom Holland, who plays Odysseus' son Telemachus, who in the story, he says he's trying to, he's the next in line. He's supposedly the rightful heir to the throne, but with Odysseus gone, we have all these other suitors who are vying for the throne, and the main complaint is where it's like, oh, you're are you a man or are you a child? You're still a child at this point. And it's like, yeah, he kind of is. I mean, he's in his 20s, obviously, the actor, but I think in the story he's supposed to be slightly older than that, so he's the right age, and he plays it well. And same with Matt Damon. Matt Damon does a great job as Odysseus. I think the main, if there's going to be a main complaint about this story and the cast characters, that there's a lot of characters and actors in this that don't get a lot of time to breathe because there's so many people. I mean, you've got Charlize Theron as Calypso. You've got you've got Anne Hathaway and Robert Pattinson in here. They have more screen time than others, but there's so many other things. It took me a long time to place it, but Benny Safdie plays Agamemnon, and he gives an interesting performance, but very limited screen time on this front, and that's sort of a problem with ensemble movies, is that you have so many different characters. There's only so much time to be allotted for certain things. So if there's going to be a complaint to be had, I think that's somewhat of a legit complaint. I will say visually, as always with Nolan films, he does a great job collaborating with cinematographers and the like. So visually, this movie looks great, as always. There is one element, I think, that is probably not going to age well, and I think they did the best they could with what they had, and that is the Cyclops. And I think it goes to show a lot of what this movie might not age as well as other Nolan films, because other Nolan films, they're comparatively light on, CG. Well, by CGI, I mean, fantastical elements. If there's CGI stuff, then it's of real world things, like, of a building, or, fudging the nuclear explosion in Oppenheimer sort of stuff. Like, real world things that we have a visual reference to. With the Cyclops, I mean, it's a mythical creature. There's no, the design work looks okay, but I think the CGI, I think they did the wise thing where they filmed as much as they could in, it happens in a dark cave with, firelit. So the lighting, they did as much as they could with this creature, but I don't think the Cyclops is going to hold up well in future viewings. So that element, I think, is a bit of a letdown, but when it sticks to practical work, like when they go to Hades, there's a, the visual things of the people, of the denizens of Hades. Like, that is a great way to show these things. And there's, one scene in particular, on one island where, the men, are eating and something happens to them. That is, I think, probably the best sequence, because it does more with less. And that is a good mark of knowing the limits of what the visual effects are going and playing into your strengths at that point. And I think that, that's going to be, that sequence alone might be Oscar worthy as far as I'm concerned with what happens in there. But overall, this story, I think perhaps its greatest weakness is what Christopher Nolan brings to it. And that is his obsession with playing around with time and order of events. Now, this story, I think it had a great framing device all set to go right in the beginning, where, cause this is, this is technically, a spoiler, but, this story is thousands of years old at this point. So, take of that what you will. And, so there is, we greet Odysseus at a certain point in his voyage, and, they jump back to, him recounting his voyage, the previous parts of the voyage, and then, looking forward to his voyage. If he just stuck to that, I think this would have worked a little bit better. But I think Christopher Nolan may have gotten carried away a little bit, because some of his time jumps, are quite distracting. Especially, you see, jumping back to where this journey technically starts, which is the end of the Trojan War, where, you have the horse, taking the Trojan horse into the gates, and then obviously what happens after that. And they keep coming back to this, and, they kept coming back and showing just a little bit more, and then, this is something that Christopher Nolan's done before in other movies, and it really didn't need to do that. You should have done that maybe once or twice, and that's it. And, it's like, what does it add, really, at that point? At a certain point, just kind of, it kind of derailed the story at times, and I think that that is this movie's perhaps biggest hindrance to making it a great movie. Because I think that's what makes it somewhat exhausting by the end of it. But overall, I would say this movie does the job of telling this story of the Odyssey. I mean, I'm sure they cut out a whole bunch, and we had to, as with any adaptation, not everything gets adapted perfectly, or that some things get cut out. But this does a decent enough job of making the story work. And the visuals are, for the most part, like I said, the Cyclops is a little bit iffy, but this story, visually it looks great. As much practical effects as Nolan likes to use, I think works really well here as well. So if I was going to say grade this movie on a letter scale, I would say this movie, I'm going to give this the Odyssey an A- for like I said, it has some weaknesses, But I can't call this a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. I just can't call it a great movie. It's definitely a very solid, good movie. And if I was going to weigh this in on the scale of unoriginality, now this one's kind of tricky for me. I'll get into reasons why in a second, but if I was going to weigh this in on the scale of unoriginality, I would say this weighs in at original enough. It's a passing grade, but nothing to be overly proud of. So with that, I'm going to leave the spoiler-free realm and go into spoiler talk of The Odyssey. This is where we get into some certain character arcs and plot developments that may seem familiar to you, and we may have seen them before. Now, I say that it was tricky to me to weigh this on the scale of unoriginality because this story has, like I said, it's thousands of years old. It's one of the oldest stories we have in Western culture, and elements of The Odyssey have been implemented into various stories for thousands of years at this point. So to call this an unoriginal story would be, where have you seen, these things before is kind of it's too broad a category in my opinion. There is something that I think, I can point to that you may have seen before, specifically The Odyssey as a Christopher Nolan movie, because I think Christopher Nolan has been telling elements of this story for years at this point. And I think there's a case to be made that this is the accumulation of many stories that he's told prior up to this. And you've seen tropes of this, from his prior filmography. Let's start with, Inception, to start out with. You got, your hero, going through a long harrowing journey to get back, from a self-imposed exile to go back to his family. So you got that going on. You got, The Dark Knight Rises. You have the hero saving the city, or his kingdom, and then he stalls his successor, and then he goes into self-imposed exile with Anne Hathaway. So you've got that with Batman. He saved Gotham. He, put Robin onto the path to becoming his successor, and he goes into exile with Catwoman, who also happens to be played by Anne Hathaway. So you got that there. And then, you got Oppenheimer, where, you also have our main character musing on his role in ending a long war with devastating effects. With Oppenheimer, it was obviously developing of the nuclear bomb. And here it is Odysseus, seeing what he says, the fall of civilization, after Troy, and, the penned up of 10 years of rage in one night, that theme pervades the entire movie. So I'm sure there could be other points that maybe I'm just cherry picking, but those are the three that popped into my mind. I'm sure if, people dive into his filmography, you could find more examples. Like I said, this is a story that is thousands of years old. It's one of our oldest stories, and Christopher Nolan told it his way and in his style, and it's something that he's been working on for, more or less his entire career, as far as I'm concerned. So those are my main points of comparison that I wanted to talk about. What did you think of The Odyssey? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What about my analysis? Do you agree, disagree? Did I miss something? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate whatever audience I can get. Be sure to look for my next movie review, which will be for Spider-Man Brand New Day, which comes out July 31st. So be sure to look for that. And if you like this video or any other video on my channel, please give me a like, share, and especially a subscribe. I would very much appreciate it. Again, thank you so much for watching. Just remember, there is nothing new under the sun. And yes, you have seen it before.